The ants are already on him and he cannot feel them, and that is the worst part. Not the smell, not the sound of the jungle pressing against the darkness from every direction, but the fact that the man who taught him how to read a compass is lying 3 feet away, delirious with fever, and the ants are moving across his leg in columns, and he cannot feel them, and the map is in the bag, and the bag is right there, and the decision has already been made, even though he has not yet admitted it to himself. This is The Human Limit. I am your host. If you have the stomach for stories that do not offer you a redemption arc at the end, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the like button, because what I am about to tell you is the story of a man who stole a map and a machete and a water purifier in the middle of the night in the Amazon jungle and walked away from his friend who was still breathing. And then he survived, and his friend did not. And he has been constructing and dismantling justifications for that decision every single day for 11 years. Let me take you back to the beginning. 3 men, 300 miles from the nearest settlement with roads. 20 days into an expedition that had been planned for 14 months, led by a man I will call Raphael, an experienced wilderness guide who had made this crossing twice before and believed he understood what the jungle would cost them. His 2 companions were men he had chosen himself, men he trusted with his life, which is the specific irony at the center of everything that follows. The Amazon interior, at the depth they had reached, is not a place that permits abstraction. It does not allow you to think of it in terms of nature documentaries or adventure literature or any of the frameworks that distance provides. At that depth, it is sensory and total and relentless. The heat is not temperature, it is pressure, a physical weight that the body carries in addition to the pack and the machete and the water filtration equipment and the satellite phone that stopped working on the 16th day for reasons Raphael could not diagnose and could not fix. No signal, no contact, no extraction possible until they reached the river crossing 300 miles ahead, where a boat was scheduled to meet them on a date that was now 11 days away. 11 days of jungle between 3 men and the only exit. On the 18th day, Marcus was bitten. Raphael writes about this moment in the account he gave to a wilderness medicine researcher 4 years after the incident, an account he provided on condition of anonymity that has since been partially lifted, enough to confirm the essential facts, though not the full identities. He wrote, "We never identified exactly what bit him. The wound was on his lower left calf, small at first, the kind of puncture mark that the jungle produces constantly, and that experienced travelers learn to clean and monitor and not catastrophize. Marcus cleaned it. We had a basic medical kit, and we used the correct protocols. By the following morning, the tissue around the wound had changed color, and by the morning after that, the smell had started. The smell is what Raphael returns to again and again in his account. Not the visual deterioration of the tissue, not the fever that arrived on the 3rd day and drove Marcus's temperature to levels that produced incoherence, not the sounds Marcus made in the night when the pain broke through the delirium. The smell. Because the smell was information. The smell was the jungle communicating with absolute clarity what was happening inside the tissue of his friend's leg and what it meant for all 3 of them. The infection was necrotizing, flesh-eating in the language most people use. The tissue was dying from the inside outward, and without surgical intervention and specific antibiotics, neither of which existed within 300 miles in any direction, it would continue dying. The leg would not recover. The systemic infection that was producing the fever would spread. The timeline was not something Raphael needed medical training to estimate. He had been in the jungle long enough to understand how bodies fail when the jungle decides to take them. Marcus could not walk. A man who cannot walk in the Amazon interior 300 miles from the nearest road, with 11 days between him and the extraction point, with a necrotizing infection consuming his leg and a fever dismantling his cognition, is not a man who can be carried to safety. The terrain does not permit it. 300 miles of root systems and river crossings and elevation change and undergrowth that requires a machete to navigate does not permit one man to carry another. It barely permits 3 healthy men to carry themselves. Raphael writes, "I did not arrive at the mathematics immediately. I want to be clear about that because the version of this story that I find most unbearable is the version where I am someone who calculated coldly and efficiently from the beginning. I did not. For 3 days, I cared for Marcus the way you care for someone you have put in danger, with the specific guilt of a leader who made the decisions that led to the situation. I cleaned the wound. I managed the fever as best the medical kit allowed. I stayed awake in the night listening to his breathing and watching the wound and trying to find the version of the calculation that did not end where the calculation kept ending. The calculation kept ending in the same place. If all 3 of them remained where they were, they would exhaust their food supply within 5 days. The jungle at that depth does not provide reliable caloric support for men who are not trained in its specific foraging, and Raphael and his second companion Thomas were not. They had provisions for 11 more days if rationed carefully, less if Marcus's fever continued driving his caloric needs upward, less still if they were stationary, because moving bodies find opportunities that stationary bodies miss. 5 days of food, 11 days from extraction, a man who could not move, and something else that Raphael writes about with a precision that suggests he has examined it many times. He wrote, "On the 4th night I heard them. Not the ants during the day, those had been present since the 2nd day, and I had managed them, cleaned them away, maintained a basic perimeter. These were different. Army ants, moving in the darkness in a column I could hear before I could see, and I understood, in the way that the jungle teaches you to understand things, not through reasoning but through the body, that the infection had changed the scent profile of Marcus's wound, enough to register on systems far older and more efficient than mine. The jungle knew. Before I fully admitted what I knew, the jungle had already made its assessment. The 3 of them had 1 map, 1 machete, 1 water purification system. Without the map, navigation through that section of the Amazon was not possible. Without the machete, movement through the undergrowth was not possible. Without the water purification system, the river water was not drinkable within the time frame available. These 3 objects were the difference between 2 men reaching the extraction point and 2 men not reaching it. Raphael writes about the night he made the decision with the specific flatness of someone who has told the story enough times that the emotional valence has been separated from the facts. Not because the emotion is gone, but because this is the only way to tell it without stopping. He wrote, "Thomas and I did not discuss it directly. I want to say that clearly. We spoke around it, in the way that people speak around things that have only one resolution when the resolution is unbearable. Thomas said that Marcus would not make it to the river. I said that I knew. Thomas said that we could not carry him. I said that I knew. And then we were quiet for a long time, and in the quiet the jungle was very loud, and Marcus was breathing in the way that fevers make people breathe, shallow and fast and occasionally interrupted by sounds that were not words. I did not sleep that night." What he describes in the hours that followed is not a decision in the way that decisions are usually described. There is no moment of resolution, no clarity arriving to cut through the ambivalence. There is instead something more like erosion, the moral resistance wearing down, not through argument, but through repetition. The calculation running again and again, and always arriving at the same place until the arriving stops feeling like a conclusion and starts feeling like a fact. He wrote, "I thought about his daughter. Marcus has a daughter who was 6 years old at the time, and I had met her twice, and she had the specific quality of attention that some children have that makes adults feel fully seen, and I thought about her for a long time in the dark. I thought about what I would say to her. I thought about the version of this story I would be able to tell, and the version I would not. And then I thought about my own children, and I understood that thinking about Marcus's daughter was a form of delay, was my mind's way of extending the period before action, and that the action had already been determined. He waited until 4 in the morning. Marcus was in the deepest part of the fever cycle at that hour, his consciousness not reliably present, his responses to sound and movement reduced to the reflexive. Raphael had watched this pattern for 4 nights, and he knew it. He knew the window. He wrote, "I moved to the supply area, which was separated from the sleeping area by perhaps 4 meters. I had arranged this 3 days earlier without understanding why I was arranging it, which I think means I had understood before I admitted to understanding. I took the map first. I folded it the way I had been taught, the way that keeps the relevant section accessible without exposing the full document to moisture. Then the machete. Then the water purification unit, which I wrapped in the canvas sleeve and placed in the main compartment of my pack. I left him his food. All of it. This is something I have thought about many times since. I left him his food and his remaining medication and the secondary medical kit and the emergency whistle that would have made no sound that any rescue could have heard for 300 miles in any direction. I tell myself I left these things because leaving them was the humane action available to me. I think the more honest answer is that leaving them made the action I was taking feel like something other than what it was. I stood over him for what I believe was approximately 2 minutes. He was on his side, facing away from me. The wound was on the leg closest to the ground. I could hear the ants. Not the column from the previous night, something smaller and more constant. The ambient presence of the jungle processing what the jungle processes. His breathing was the fever breathing, fast and shallow. His hands were loosely curled in front of his chest the way a sleeping person holds their hands. I did not touch him. I did not say anything. I left through the eastern perimeter of the camp in the direction of the river, moving slowly until I was far enough that my movement would not register, and then moving faster. Thomas was already 50 meters ahead of me on the agreed bearing. They walked for 7 days. Raphael writes about this section of the account with the least detail of any part, which he acknowledges directly. He writes, "I do not have a precise account of those 7 days in the way that I have a precise account of the days in camp. I have impressions. The quality of light through the canopy at different hours, the sound of the river when we first heard it on the 5th day, a sound I had been listening for so intently that when it came it did not seem real. The specific weight of my pack, which I monitored obsessively because the weight told me where the provisions were relative to where we needed to be. I do not have a precise account of what I thought during those 7 days. I think this is not because I was not thinking, but because the thinking was of a kind that does not translate cleanly into language. The extraction boat was at the coordinates on the date agreed. The team that met them had not been alarmed by their silence, because the satellite phone failure was a known risk, and the timeline had not yet exceeded the margin built into the plan. Raphael told them about Marcus on the boat. He told them the location as precisely as he could reconstruct it. He told them about the wound, and the fever, and the timeline. A search team entered the jungle 4 days later. They found the camp on the 7th day of searching. They found the equipment that had been left. They found evidence consistent with what Raphael had told them about Marcus's condition and about the progression of the infection. They did not find Marcus. The jungle does not always leave things to find. Raphael was not charged with any crime. The investigation examined his account and the physical evidence and concluded that the situation had been a survival emergency beyond the threshold of standard duty of care, that his actions were consistent with extreme survival conditions, that the death of Marcus was attributable to the infection and to the impossibility of extraction given the terrain and distance. The report did not examine what it meant that he took the map while Marcus was sleeping. The report did not ask about the 2 minutes he stood over his friend before he left. The report did not ask about Thomas, who has not spoken publicly about any of this, and who Raphael says, in the account, he has not spoken to since the day they boarded the extraction boat. Raphael writes, "I have been asked many times in the years since whether I made the right decision. I understand what the question is looking for. It is looking for either a justification that holds under examination, or a confession of guilt that provides the questioner with a clean moral position from which to judge. I cannot provide either. What I can tell you is what I know. I know that the mathematics of that situation, examined without emotion, supported the conclusion that 2 men leaving gave 2 men a chance, and all 3 staying gave no one a chance. I know that this mathematics is real, and that I did not invent it to serve my own survival. I know that Marcus could not have walked, and that carrying him was not possible, and that the infection would have killed him regardless of what I did. I also know that I took the map while he was sleeping. I know that I stood over him for 2 minutes and then turned and walked into the dark. I know that somewhere in 300 miles of Amazon jungle, there is a place where I arranged the supply area 3 days before I needed it, without admitting to myself why I was arranging it, and that this arrangement is the most honest record of when the decision was actually made. I know that his daughter is 17 years old now. I know this because I have kept track in the way that a person keeps track of the things they cannot put down. He ended the account with something he described as the only true thing he knew how to say about the experience. He wrote, "The jungle took Marcus. That is accurate. The jungle also let me through. I have spent 11 years trying to understand whether those two facts are related, whether the jungle made a selection, whether survival at that depth means something beyond the biological. I have not arrived at an answer. What I have arrived at is the understanding that I will keep asking the question for as long as I live, and that the asking is not a form of penance because penance implies a transaction, and there is no transaction available. The asking is simply what remains. That is the human limit." Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, tell me what you would have done in that camp, in that dark, with the map in your hands and your friend's fever breathing 3 feet away. I read every single one. I will be back with another story from the place where human beings find out exactly what they are made of, when everything familiar has been replaced by jungle and mathematics and the specific silence of 4 in the morning. The Amazon is still there. It is always there. It does not remember Marcus, and it does not remember Raphael, and it does not record what happened in that camp on that night the way that human beings need things to be recorded. It simply continues, as it has continued for millions of years, processing what it processes, indifferent to the meaning we attach to what it takes. Somewhere in 300 miles of that indifference, a man made the coldest decision of his life, and walked out, and survived, and is still walking.